Good afternoon, morning, evening, depending on when you end up watching this. Last week, we said that your system produces the customer experience. The way your system is designed, the business that you operate results directly in how your customer feels about that business experience. And this way, we're going to go a step further. We're going to say that that experience, when it's repeated over time, becomes trust. That's where today's lesson begins. Because when so many people hear the phrase lifetime value of the customer, they immediately start thinking about tactics. They think about follow-up systems, retention strategies, account management stages, upsells, cross-sells, downsells, reactivation campaigns, clever email sequences. And yes, all those things may appear somewhere inside the business relationship. But that's not what this lesson is about. This lesson is not about how to increase the dollar value of customer lifetime value. It is not a lesson on how to get more clients, extract more juice out of your clients. It's not a lesson on the follow-up tactics to use to do that. It's not a lesson on monetization strategy. We're talking this business structure. It's the business structural lesson. Because lifetime value is not mainly a tactics problem. It's not mainly a reminders problem. It's not mainly crafting a clever offer problem. It is a trust problem. More precisely, it is a system-produced trust over time problem. Here's your core concept for today. Your system either compounds trust or it erodes trust. Lifetime value is simply the financial expression of that pattern. The dollar figure extracted, the dollar figure exchanged is the lagging indicator. The leading indicator is trust. Let's make the contrast sharper. A funnel can create a sale. A system can create future sales. This matters because many businesses can get a first yes. It can come purely because of timing or urgency or a low friction offer, a tripwire product, pure curiosity, a novelty, a skilled sales conversation, even desperation from the buyer's perspective that just happens to align in the right moment in time. That first sale can happen for many reasons. But the second sale, the renewal, the expansion of the relationship, a longer relationship, a calmer decision not to churn, these usually require something deeper. They require trust. And trust is not built in a moment. Trust is built in the consistency that your system demonstrates over a period of time. And so the realization that I want this lesson to drive is simply, my system does not produce, if my system does not produce consistent trust, revenue will not compound. That's the lesson. Your system produces trust over time, or it produces distrust. Not because trust is sentimental, not because it sounds nice, but because in business, trust is one of the main reasons that people continue. And when they continue, that continuation becomes visible on the pricing, on the profit and loss statement. That continuation becomes visible on the cash flow statement. The finances reflect the reality rather than being the reality. That is what lifetime value really is. We are going to define this carefully because lifetime value is one of those phrases that has become heavily financialized. And I have an MBA, the academic world that revolves around business and finance and stock prices is incentivized by quarterly earnings. And that incentivization of quarterly earnings has magnified the value, the importance presented by the financial documents and drawn attention off of the leading indicators, which are the levers that we use to affect those things. People hear lifetime value and they think a dashboard metric. They think spreadsheet map. They think customer value extraction. They think monetization leverage. They think increased revenue per client. Yes, lifetime value can be measured financially. But if you start with the metric, you miss the mechanism. So for today, I'm reframing the conversation this way. Lifetime value is a financial expression of trust that was produced over time by the system. This is a different way of thinking about it because it moves the attention away from how do I squeeze more juice out of this relationship and toward what would make staying in a long-term business relationship with me feel like the obvious next decision for my client. That's the real question. Not how do I get them to buy again, but what is my system teaching them to expect if they choose to stay? This matters because a first sale might in fact happen inside a weak system. A first sale can happen because a first sale can happen even if the business is confusing, the business is chaotic, the business is overpromised, the business is under or overscoped, the business is misaligned with the client's actual needs. A first sale is not proof of system strength. Sometimes it's purely a matter of luck and timing, as we mentioned. Sometimes it's only proof that the first promise sounded compelling. But lifetime value appears when the system makes continuation make sense. When the relationship is getting easier over time instead of harder. When the client feels known, remembered, less like they have to start over every single month. This is when they don't churn. That is the trust layer. And that is why I want to say this again clearly. Revenue is not created only at the point of sale. It is created by a system that makes the next sale possible. But before we go further, we need to re-look at that familiar frame. Because if we're going to say that the system produces trust over time, we should be clear about what we mean by system. When people hear the word, they are often thinking about the CRM or the workflows, the automations, the funnels, the pipelines, the dashboards, the financial reports. And those things all matter, but they are not the totality of the system. For our purposes, a system is the structure that determines how decisions, responsibilities, and outcomes connect inside a business. And for today's lessons, there are key client-facing elements I want you to notice. Communication. When there's a customer complaint about a business, almost always it's about a lack of communication. Occasionally it's about delivery of the product, but usually it's about the lack of communication regarding delivery of the product. It's about consistency. It's about follow through. It's about who do I talk to that can address this issue? These are not the totality of the system, but they are places where the client feels the system as it impacts them. If delivery is unstable, trust will not compound. If ownership is unclear, trust will not compound. If consistency is missing, trust will reset. If follow through is weak, trust will reset. If communication breaks down, trust will reset. And that is why this lesson follows naturally from the previous one. Last week we said your system decides your customer experience. This week we're saying repeated experience is what generates trust or distrust. Because the client doesn't just experience one event. They experience the pattern. And over time they are asking, is that one interaction good? And start concluding this is how the business works. The conclusion is that they're coming to is, do I trust or do I distrust? And once the conclusion forms, the financial outcome becomes predictable. If they distrust, they will churn. They will leave. They will find someone else to provide the service. If they trust, they will stay. They will buy your recurring product. So this is quite simple. The system drives the experience. The experience produces the pattern. The pattern generates trust or distrust, which has a lagging effect of lifetime value. The system is the hidden structure, the ownership, the handoff, the stage, the scope logic, the escalation paths, the delivery expectations, the communication norms, what gets remembered, and what gets repeated. The experience is how the customer actually experiences the journey, how smooth it feels, whether they feel like they have to repeat themselves, whether they feel like they've been handled or manipulated or guided and helped, whether the business is following through, whether the relationship feels stable or chaotic. And when that experience repeats, it becomes a pattern. And this is the important part. Any single positive moment is not yet trust. Likewise, every single frustrating moment is not always distrust. But a repeated pattern of either one of those, a repeated experience of either one of those becomes a pattern. A repeated pattern of either one of those becomes the experience that the customers felt. And the pattern becomes the expectation. At some point, the customer is anticipating this is what the pattern is going to continue to be, which leads to trust or distrust. When the client says, these people do what they say, I know how this relationship works, I can stay here without worrying, that is expressions of trust. Or they might say, I never know which person I'm going to get. I don't know which version of that person I'm going to get. I always have to do the checkup. I have to initiate the follow-up. I don't even trust the continuity. All of those are symptoms of indicators of distrust. And whether it's trust or distrust, lifetime value is the financial expression of that pattern. Staying, renewing, expanding, returning, buying adjacent scope, buying adjacent services, continuing without restarting the whole bidding evaluation process. Those are the indicators of trust leading to lifetime value. And that is why a good first sale can be an event, but a lifetime value is driven by a pattern. Lifetime value reflects a pattern. A sale is simply an event in the pattern. And because it is a pattern, it can be structural. So here's one of the most important things to think about when we have this conversation. The same client will stay in one system longer than they'll stay in a different system. And it's not because one provider is more talented, it's because one system teaches trust more clearly than the other. So when someone says clients in my industry always churn, people only buy once, nobody is loyal anymore, I suggest that we should slow down a little. Because sometimes, yes, those statements are partially true, but like all generalizations, including the generalization that all generalizations are wrong, those statements are generalizations. They are too broad. And the reality is the exact same person can behave very differently in two different systems. Which means the useful question isn't only is this. The more useful question is, what system is teaching them whether it makes sense to stay with this provider? That is where lifetime value begins to make sense structurally. We're going to start with this broad contrast. Same client, same first need, different system, different long-term behavior. In a transactional system, the business is good at generating the first yes. The offer is strong, the pitch is clear, the sense of urgency is not manufactured, it's real. The price is a low friction point. The salesperson is very persuasive or very relational. Maybe the landing page is perfectly laid psychologically, and the first sale happens. But after the sale, ownership of the project is fuzzy. Communication seems reactive. Delivery is technically acceptable, but not coherent and perfect. No one clearly shapes the conversation around what is the next step. And the client experiences a series of disconnected moments rather than a structurally building relationship. The client may, in fact, get everything that they paid for. That is important. We're not talking about scams, because that's a whole nother thing. I don't do scams. The issue is not a failure of delivery. It's a failure of continuity. And from that, what does the client conclude? The client starts thinking, that worked, but I'm not sure I want to go through the pain again. They're fine, but I'm not committed to them as my provider. I got what I paid for, but I'm not sure they really know me. And therefore, if I need this product again, I'm willing to shop around again. Notice what happened there. The business got the sale, but the system did not teach the client that staying would be easier, safer, or more valuable than restarting elsewhere. So lifetime value stays weak, not because the first transaction was terrible, but because the system did not create compounding trust. By contrast, a trust compounding system teaches continuity. Yes, the first sale matters, but after the sale, importantly, ownership is clear. The client knows what's going to happen next. The business remembers the context of the conversation. Communication is consistent. The delivery matches the promise, and the next recommendation that comes feels connected to that promise, not opportunistic. The relationship is getting easier over time, not harder. And what does this lead the client to conclude? These people understand how this process works. I don't have to start from zero every time I have a conversation with them. They know my context. They understand my industry. They understand my business. Staying here feels easier than shopping around, which means if they suggest a next step, I'm willing to listen. And that is the difference. Lifetime value is not mainly about how good the first sale felt. It's about what the system taught the client to expect in the next iteration. And this matters because too many people are trying to increase lifetime value without inspecting their post-sale system that is teaching their client whether trust should continue. Or we can look at this in a way that's more uncomfortable. Because this one hits really close to home for a lot of capable operators. Same client, same provider, same skill level, a different system which produces a different trust outcome. When we have the operator who is talented but inconsistent, this is somebody who's really good at what they do. The work products are strong, the ideas are good, the recommendations are on point, the person is smart, maybe even brilliant, and that is exactly how this system becomes deceptive. Because the quality of the product is real, but the system produces it inconsistently. The response speed varies wildly. Scope language shifts from month to month. One week, the provider is very proactive, and the next week, they disappear altogether. One client gets deep personal care, another gets a bare minimum throughput. Sometimes there's strategic guidance, sometimes there's only task completion. Sometimes follow through is strong, other times, not so much. And what does the client have to conclude? It's usually not they are untalented or they don't care. The client is going to conclude things like they're good, but I'm not quite sure what I'm going to get. When they're on, they're great. I just wish it felt more stable. I trust their ability, but not always the consistency of the relationship. And this matters immensely because ability alone does not guarantee compounding trust. If your system produces inconsistency, it does not matter how good you are, trust will reset. This is one of the most important lessons. Because many talented operators assume that quality work alone should create long-term loyalty. But if the experience does not become more consistently coherent over time, trust will not compound in the way that that operator expects. By contrast, when you have an operator who is coherent and repeatable, they may or may not be more talented. They, in fact, might be measurably less talented, but their system is coherent and the customer experiences stable communication, a predictable delivery rhythm, clear boundaries, remembered context, defined next steps, less relational friction. The client may not describe this as genius. They might not even describe it with exciting words. They may simply say, it works, I know what to expect, they're reliable. Importantly, the relationship is easy to maintain. This is the moment why trust is compounding, because trust is often growing not from dramatic excellence, but from repeated coherence. Repeated coherence creates staying power. staying power becomes financially visible. That is what really it drives lifetime value. So let's apply this to recurring relationship products. When recurring revenue starts feeling like restarting every single month versus recurring revenue subscription products that feel like accumulating energy. Because this is where people say they have lifetime value, when what they really have is repeat billing without compounding interest. It's the same client, it's the same monthly invoice, it's the same subscription, but they're in a different system with different meanings. In a weak recurring system, the client is paying for a subscription every month. And on paper, that looks like retention. But the actual experience for the customer is feeling like restarting every month. They feel like they have to restate the context. They feel like they have to remind the business what matters to them. They're not sure who in the business owns what part of their relationship. Their confusion returns, the handoff problems return, the same strategic questions get reopened from scratch month after month, and nothing feels cumulative. And after a while, the client starts thinking, why does this feel like it takes so much effort? Why am I paying monthly when I have to re-explain things? Why does the relationship not feel like it's getting smarter over time? Why do I feel like I have to manage the relationship? And this is a very dangerous moment because the recurring invoice is still happening, but the trust pattern is not compounding. The business thinks they have lifetime value. The client is experiencing friction that they are choosing to tolerate. These are not the same thing, and eventually churn will become the rational choice for the client. Not because the client is disloyal, but because the system taught them that continuity was not creating enough trust to justify staying. And contrast that with a strong recurring system. Yes, the client is paying for a monthly subscription or a monthly retainer, but the relationship feels cumulative. It's gaining energy. Each month, the business seems to understand the client's needs and context faster. Past decisions matter, and build to previous work makes the current work easier. The client does not have to keep reintroducing themselves and explaining their situation. The system has memory, and ownership of the components of the situation is clear. The business builds on prior understanding rather than forgetting it and starting over. And this leads the client to think things like, they know us, they know our situation, they know our problems. This is getting easier over time. The relationship is becoming more efficient. Leaving would mean starting over, which leads to staying feels more valuable than restarting with a different vendor. And that is the point. Lifetime value exists when the system makes continuity feel more valuable than restarting. Lifetime value exists when the system makes continuity feel more valuable than shopping around. Because recurring revenue that feels like constant restarts doesn't produce the same trust pattern as recurring revenue that feels like accumulated understanding that is compounding. And eventually, the financial difference between those two systems becomes very different. Or let's look at a support relationship business. Because this gives us a clean bridge back to the lessons on the previous two lessons. We're talking again about the same client with the same problem, but they come into a support system that has a different approach. And it results in a different outcome from a trust perspective. There's a support system that compounds fatigue. In this system, support feels like friction. The client has to explain everything every time they have a conversation. The business has partial memory. Ownership of the components is unclear. Escalation is vague. One response contradicts with another. Generic messages show up in the client's inbox. The support interaction feels like a barrier instead of a continuity system. And what happens over time? The support interaction starts teaching distrust. Maybe not total distrust, but fatigue. The client starts thinking, I hate having to contact them. It's always more effort than it should be. I'm not sure who actually owns this problem. Why does getting help feel more like I'm the one doing the work? And financially, this starts mattering because every support interaction is now helping to reset trust instead of deepening trust. Not because the people are rude, but because the system is teaching the client that the relationship is not going to get easier over time. And we look at, by contrast, a support system that compounds trust. It feels like continuity. When the client contacts the business, the context is already visible. The prior relationship already matters. The person responding understands more quickly where they are in the process, where the client is in the process. Escalation happens when it's needed. Exceptions have particular people who have ownership, and the interaction feels less like entering a maze and more like staying inside a known path. It leads the client to think things like, hey, remember, I don't have to start over. Someone actually owns the solution to this problem. And this business starts getting easier to work with over time. That is the symptom of trust compounding. And once trust starts compounding, it becomes visible financially. Because cost is not only, because support is not only a cost center in these moments, it is also one of the places where the business teaches the client whether staying is wise. This matters. The same support interaction can either compound trust or it can compound fatigue. And if it compounds fatigue, trust will reset. And we're going to go back to Alex briefly because Alex is still useful. He's the same operator, but he has two different systems in our little microcosm. And when he's operating one way, he has a different lifetime value outcome than when he operates a different way. Because the original Alex was capable, he was helpful, he was friendly, he was flexible, he was willing, and he always did good work for the first project every time. The clients were probably impressed, but the system was vague because he kept drifting and he would take on any project. Support, implementation, advice, troubleshooting, adjacent help, interpretation, it all just keeps blending, and the client never knows where the boundary is. And Alex slides into this gray, the marketing generalist guy, my marketing dude. Alex never fully stabilizes what the relationship is supposed to become. And so what happens? Because Alex has great referral partners, he gets the first sales, maybe even the second project, but the trust doesn't compound because the relationship doesn't get more coherent over time because someone asks him to do something and he just does it. It stays useful, but unstable. The client gets value, but not enough predictability to deepen with confidence. And so the expansion stalls. Recurring revenue remains fragile. Adjacent offers feel, yeah, I could do that, uncertain. The relationship remains dependent on Alex's talent rather than a clear, repeatable system. But what happens when Alex declares what his system is? What support means becomes clear. What advisory means becomes clear. What implementation means becomes clear. What gets referred out becomes clear. The client doesn't just know what Alex can do, the client knows what kind of relationship this is. And that changes the trust pattern. The relationship might, in fact, be less flashy, less seductive, less, I can do everything. But over time, it begins to feel more reliable. And reliability becomes trust. And trust becomes continuation, and continuation becomes lifetime value. So again, same operator, different system, different lifetime value outcome. The point. So we are going to make this personal. They're not tactics questions. They're recognition questions. They're not for you to answer to me. Although if it would help you to move forward, I would entertain you sending your answers to me, and I can help you think through, what should I do about this? Because the point here is to hold up a mirror to yourself, look yourself in the eye, and say, dude, what am I doing that is creating my outcomes? These are the things that I can control. What the client does or does not do, what the client thinks or does not think, what the client feels or does not feel, none of those things I can control. What the prospect's needs are, what the prospect's priorities are, what the prospect wants, what the prospect's presenting problem versus what the prospect's underlying concern is, whatever the correct grammar, all of those things are outside of our control. What we can control is, am I creating the environment that makes what I want possible? So these questions are how you hold that mirror up and ask yourself, what part of your system is responsible for the client choosing to stay? And if you cannot answer that clearly, you probably don't have lifetime value. You have transactions that haven't stopped cycling yet. Or what repeated experience is your system teaching clients to expect from you over time? This is a strong diagnostic question because your clients do not stay based on your intentions. They don't experience our intentions. They experience the results of our actions. You might have the best intentions in the world, but they stay based on the pattern that the system teaches them to expect, or they leave based on the pattern that the system teaches them to expect. Here's the critical one. Where does your system reset trust instead of compounding it? That question is probably the sharpest one in this whole lesson today. Because many businesses will assume that trust is accumulating, when in reality, it is continuing to reset through inconsistency or weak ownership or unstable continuity And the business is not seeing it because the recurring invoice, the retainer or the subscription is coming in every month, and they're looking at their P&L, they're looking at their cash flow statement, they're looking at their balance sheet, and they're not looking at their relationships. They're seeing the lagging indicator, and the lagging indicator is still showing that they're okay, but the relationship has continued to reset. Trust has continued to reset. Oh, each time it's starting over. It's just this fragile little flickering flame instead of a bonfire. It's not loyalty, it's I haven't decided to change yet. And when someone comes along with a better offer, that change, that churn is going to happen in a moment, and then you'll see it on the P&L. Then you'll see it on the cash flow statement. And to make this just really simple, summary question. If you couldn't answer honestly this one question about your own business, this lesson has probably done its job. What pattern would you produce for your client that would make staying with your business the obvious next decision for that client? Not can you delight them with a picnic basket or send them a holiday gift bundle. What pattern of behavior could you demonstrate that would make it just obvious that they should never churn? Not because you now have a new sequence to deploy, but because you have begun to see lifetime value as a system outcome, not as a revenue metric. So let's talk about what this all means. Today's lesson is not lifetime value matters, because of course lifetime value matters. There's a reason that lifetime value it's actually the bottom center of the chart. The 9 points of the 9-point marketing plan are: who is the audience? What is the message or offer? What are the channels where we're going to reach them? Lead capture, lead opt-in. I've decided. I'm not really happy with lead capture as a term. Lead opt-in is how we get that audience member to say, yes, I want more information. Lead nurture is how we build that trust before the sale over time. Lead close, the sale, is how we convert the attention into a cash transaction. Point 7 is how that customer experiences that transaction, what that delivery of that product or service feels like in that moment. Point 9 is, and we're going to go to that in the next session, how we turn that experience, point 7 and point 8, into compounding social proof that allow us to expand our reach and services. And it becomes a cycle because it points back to point 1 of clarifying who our audience and what is and what our message for that audience is. But point 8 at this bottom center of the chart is lifetime value of the customer is driven by, do they trust us? Does this system that we're creating, that our business implements, does it produce trust that we will do what we say we do? We will do what we say we are going to do. And will we make it low friction or high friction? Because lifetime value is a financial expression of trust that was produced by the system. Last week, we said your system produces the experience. This week, we said that experience repeated over time becomes trust. And once trust forms, the financial consequences are the predictable outcome. The clients stay, or they do not. They expand the services, or they do not. They come back for another service, or they do not. And that is why lifetime value of a customer is not mainly about follow-up. It's not mainly about reminders. It's not mainly about monetization. It's about the structure that you've created. Because your system does not produce consistent, if your system does not produce consistent trust, the revenue will not compound. If your system does not produce consistent trust, your revenue will not compound. It will simply be cyclical, transactional. So the pattern is the system creates the experience. The experience produces a pattern. The pattern is sensed by the client as trust, positive or negative. And whether that trust is positive or negative drives the lifetime value outcome. The system produces the experience. The experience is a pattern that generates either trust or distrust. And the lifetime value is a symptom of whether that is trust, that system produce trust or distrust. And if trust compounds internally, the market will eventually reflect that trust externally in the reviews, in the reputation, in the referrals. That is where we're going next, because trust, when it's visible to other people, becomes reputation. And reputation is what powers those reviews, the referrals, and the repeated market trust. In closing, funnels can produce a sale, but a system will create future sales. Lifetime value isn't created by follow-up. It's created by a system that makes staying the obvious next right decision. Thank you for thinking about this with me today.